For the 2025 NFL Draft, this may yet be the most difficult one that Brad Holmes is going to have to handle, but it may not be for the reason that some people are thinking about. We're going to talk about it in this episode, folks, so stay tuned.
What are we? What makes us what we are and what we're going to be? It's grit. It's what we started with last year, guys. It doesn't matter if you have one ass cheek and three toes. I will beat your ass.
Can definitely compete with the big dogs.
10-5, end zone, touchdown, Detroit Lions.
You guys are unbelievable, man. I'm telling you.
We are driven by Detroit.
Hello, Detroit Lions friends, fans, and family members. Welcome on back to yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. I'm your host, David T. Pike. And as always, we're diving on in. So, folks, as we know, the NFL Draft is about a week or so away. Probably less at this point. And there's a lot of intrigue. There's a lot of anticipation around what's going to happen during the draft, and it's kind of reaching what I would like to call a fever pitch moment. Many fans are wondering who their teams are going to select to bring in to potentially help, get their team in a position to compete or take that next step to be able to compete. Or you have some teams like the Lions that are trying to get that next player, take that next step in order to reach and win a Super Bowl. Much of the conversation this year for the Lions has been surrounding what their own needs are. And primarily the biggest need has been about trying to improve the edge rushing component, the pass rushing component, because a lot of Lions fans, they feel that that is the one area that needs to be improved the most in order for the Lions to get to and win a Super Bowl. However, while it is important and it is crucial that the Lions focus on their own needs, I also believe that the Lions are going to have to kind of almost be like a chameleon in one sense and have their eye focused on what others are doing in the NFL as well that are around them. Now, normally I wouldn't advise this kind of dual strategy approach because focusing even a little bit on what others are doing can distract you. It can take your eye off the ball as far as what you need actually as a GM or as a head coach. But Holmes, I think, is one of the few GMs who can actually do this because we've seen him be able to balance multiple things at once and consider a whole bunch of different viewpoints and perspectives in the past and has been able to handle them pretty sufficiently and still get the Lions top-notch players. But this draft this year, I think, is going to be probably Brad Holmes' most difficult draft class that he's going to have to try and facilitate. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Now, the obvious reason that first comes to mind is because of the fact that the Lions are picking so low this year. Yes, I get it. They were picking low last year. But the thing of the matter is that last year the Lions got the great fortune of the fact that while they were picking low, they didn't have to worry about, this run on defensive players because for the majority of the first round, like the first 15, 16, 17 picks, it was just all offensive players. The Lions weren't in need of an offensive player last year. They needed a defensive player. And that's why the draft kind of, even though they were in a bit of a tough position, even though they were in a bit of we're picking low and we need a defensive player of some type, the draft board fell in a way to where it was like, hey, we don't need to feel this need to move up because the board is falling a certain way to where it's like, hey, we can wait a while. Unfortunately, this year, I don't think the Lions can play that card. This is a very, very deep defensive draft. There's a lot of defensive talent on the defensive line and the edge rushing component, and based upon what this offseason has shown, it has shown that there is quite a lot of interest. There's quite a heavy premium placed upon these different kinds of defensive, players and roles and positions that the Lions themselves are in need of. And so for me, that is one thing that the Lions are going to have a difficult time with, because they're going to have to, again, but in a different way, consider what everybody else is doing. But by doing that, they're going to have to notice that the board is going to fall probably a lot differently this year than what it has in years past. Typically, what we've seen in the past is that, hey, you know what, there's usually a mix of offensive and defense, or there's probably a heavy run on offensive players. I don't think that's going to happen this year. In fact, I wouldn't at all be surprised if more than half of the players this year in the first round are going to be defensive players. And the reason why is because, well, number one, based upon how much there was a huge interest in defensive players this offseason in terms of free agency, how much interest there was in terms of the trade market, in terms of trying to get hands on different types of players. Some were able to, some were not. I think that there's going to be a huge interest from a lot of teams in trying to improve the defense of their team. And that all stems back to what I've talked about before in the past, as far as everybody saw the same Super Bowl that, most everybody else decided to watch it did. They saw a Eagles defense that completely shut down and embarrassed the ever-living hell out of Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, and the rest of that Chiefs offense. And their mindset is, like most everybody else, that, hey, you can have a great offense, but if your defense is really, really damn good, it can actually kind of, it can kind of insulate you a little bit from having a lesser offense, a mediocre offense by comparison. Because, let's call it for what it is. When you look at what the Eagles had on offense last year, they were pretty much almost a one-trick pony. Most of their offense was squared and centered around Saquon Barkley. Jalen Hurts, even though he was the quarterback of that offense, he really didn't have as much of a role in most of the games as Saquon did. That's because the offense of the Eagles was primarily focused around getting the ball in his hands as much as possible. When you take a look at, the Chiefs by comparison, their offense has been primarily predicated upon, okay, give the ball to Mahomes and let him work his magic. And that's pretty much been what it has been. And to me, it almost seems like we're kind of going through another, circular pattern, if you will, about what happened a couple of years ago, almost a decade actually at this point. Actually more than a decade now that I think about it, when the freaking Broncos got to the Super Bowl back in, I think it was 2013, when Peyton Manning had that Broncos team and they were the highest scoring offense in the entirety of the NFL. And then they went up against the Seahawks defense, and they just got absolutely embarrassed in that Super Bowl. I think they lost, 43-8 or 48-6 or something like that. It wasn't even close. And I feel like now the NFL has come to this point where it's like, yes, you absolutely need to have a great offense. You absolutely have to. But having a really great defense will go a lot further than having a great offense. Because, again, as the old adage goes, offense wins games, defense wins championships. Now, the title of my show, the thumbnail of my show, is giving this idea that the Lions should be prepared or are preparing for getting stabbed in the back and getting a knife twist. Now, where exactly am I bringing that from? Well, let's be honest with ourselves. The Lions, like I said, also in regards to this being the most difficult draft they're probably going to have under Brad Holmes and, Dan Campbell, is primarily due to the fact that two of their ex-disciples are now head coaches. You got Ben Johnson in Chicago. You got Aaron Glenn in New York. I'm going to just say this right now. When you typically have a coach that has been underneath or has been a part of a system for as long as Glenn and Johnson were, they're going to try and they're going to implement things that they were used to seeing and thought were successful with their previous team, which is us, the Lions, and they're going to try and implement, they're going to try and invest that kind of mindset and approach with their new team. Well, here's the problem. The problem is that when you have one team that's been doing it very successfully the last couple of years because nobody else has been trying to do what the Lions have been trying to do, now you've got two other teams that are going to try and do the exact same thing. That's going to make things a bit more difficult, a bit more interesting, because now it's like, okay, we don't just have one team that's trying to do this. We've now got three teams that are trying to do this, because obviously Johnson and Glenn are going to go with what they feel is successful because they've seen how successful the Lions have been. They were there. They witnessed it. They were a part of it. So for me, I take a look at the fact that now the Lions are going to have two other teams that are most likely probably going to follow a very similar draft strategy to what the Lions have been doing the last couple of years. And that, I feel, is going to make this draft season a lot more difficult for the Lions. And it's because of the fact of not only one, you've got two guys that are now previously part of the team. They're now running their own shows elsewhere. But you have to consider where those other guys are at in regards to the draft positioning. Let's think about this, folks. Both the Bears and the Jets are in the top 10 this year for first-round draft picks. They hold quite a number of top 100 draft picks because, well, they were both really, really freaking bad last year. So naturally, the worse off a team is, the more high-end draft capital they're going to have. It's just part of the equation. Whereas the Lions, on the other hand, over the last 4 years, they have built themselves successfully into this program that they've had. Which way? I've said it before, I'll say it again. Primarily through the draft. That has been where the Lions have made their bread and butter. That's where they've made their money, is through the draft. Well, think about it. Now when you've got two other teams that are going to follow a very similar pattern, maybe not 100% similar, but quite a lot similar, and they're picking, as the Jets are at number 7 and the Bears are at number 10, that's going to make this a really, really damn interesting draft, because now it's like, okay, you're not just competing with yourself to try and find a way to get certain players that you want. Now you're competing with these other two bozos who are going to be trying to do the exact same damn thing, and they're going to be doing it through the exact same components for the defense and offense that you now have. Because think about it. Even though Ben Johnson is gone, he's going to try and do things that obviously he saw with the Lions offense, now with the Bears offense. Now that Glenn's gone, he's going to try and do similar things that he saw with the Lions defense with his defense. So yeah, I have an interesting feeling about it this year that those two are going to make this draft a much more difficult draft, because they're going to bring their mindset, they're going to bring their ideals, their schemes, their whole thought process, and give it to their GMs and say, hey, this is what I know is successful. This is what I know can work. And rather than trying to start 100% over, what do most human beings do? They revert back to what they know is successful. They revert back to their comfort zones. Well, considering the fact that both Glenn and Johnson have been with the Lions since the Campbell and Holmes era started, that's going to make things a lot more difficult for the Lions, because now they've got other guys that are going to be looking at players much the same way the Lions do. Now, in regards to those two teams, as far as I'm concerned, I think both of those teams are probably going to go with offensive picks in the first round. So that might give the Lions a little bit more of a leverage point, a little bit more leeway to try and figure stuff out. But it's not just the Bears and it's not just the the Jets that the Lions have to concern themselves with, just simply because of the fact that they've got those two guys that are former disciples of them. You've also still got to consider the fact that inside of our own division, outside of the Bears, we've still got the Packers and we've still got the Vikings. Think about it, folks. The Lions have won the NFC North Division for the last 2 straight years, something they have not done for a very, very long time. And I can tell you this right now, Packers fans, Vikings fans, they are already sick of it. They don't like the fact that, a team that has been a perpetual basement dweller, such as ourselves, has now been ruling the NFC North for the last 2 years. They want things to get quote-unquote back to normal for them, which is, they themselves ruling the North. Well, when it comes to that, the stiffest competition that the Lions have going into 2025 is, without a shadow of doubt, in my opinion, the Packers. The Packers had the least, I would say, turnover from their personnel department as far as what happened over this offseason. So really, all they're doing is adding on to what they had last year, which puts them in a pretty good spot. Now, when it comes to the Vikings, on the other hand, the Vikings have a bit of an issue. Well, I wouldn't say an issue. They have a bit of an interesting situation because, they're bringing back quite a lot of the same similar pieces, and they've added a couple of good pieces this offseason. But the one piece that they've got a massive question mark surrounding is what's going to go on with quarterback J.J. McCarthy. Because think about it. He didn't play his first year in the NFL because he had that severe knee meniscus tear. So that's going to be a massive question mark for Vikings fans. And then with the Bears, obviously they included a lot of new pieces into their team this offseason, making trades, signings, whatsoever. But again, they've also got a brand new head coach who, as I just talked about earlier, is trying to implement a new thing. And again, when he's trying to implement something that he has seen has been successful for the last couple of years, he's going to try and add pieces that he thinks are familiar, similar, or have a similar chance of success based on what he's seen in the past. So it's not just the Bears and the Jets just from the fact of, you know what? Those are ex-disciples of the Lions and what they've had over the last couple of years that are now going to also be trying to implement the same kind of, mindset, culture, scheme, whatever, in their new places. You've still got to concern yourselves and worry about what other teams in your own division are going to be doing. And then just to kind of finish this all out, to revert back to what I was just talking about Glenn and Johnson. I'm just going to say this right now, folks. It's going to be very interesting for another reason, other than the fact that they're trying to implement stuff that they've already seen successful here with the Lions. Think about it from the Jets' perspective. Aaron Glenn has one thing going for him in the fact that he's a former scout. Most people forget that about him, but Glenn was actually a scout with the Jets back in 2012 and 2013. So he actually has a little bit of scouting knowledge, a little bit of scouting experience as to far as what he's looking for. And I'm telling you this right now, that's something that I think is going to be a rather interesting thing to say is like, okay, I wonder how Glenn's going to use this to his advantage. Now, with Johnson, on the other hand, I'm going to be honest. How do I put this? I kind of look at Johnson now as if he is just this, how do I put it? He's the kind of person that's almost two-faced, in my opinion. Because when he's in front of the cameras, he just gives this nice grin, nice smile, and like, oh yeah, we're all great, grand, and glorious. We're happy, go, and just no problems whatsoever. But we've seen moments where he has let things slip, and now it seems like he's sending a jab back at his former team, his former quarterback, and then he'll go back and play damage control and say, the media is just blowing that out of proportion, and they're just twisting it and making it into something that it isn't. It's like, again, trust me, based upon what my dad has taught me in the past, he's like, behind every lie, there's a sliver of truth. And the way I adapt that to this statement is behind every comment, every statement, there's a little bit more to it than just, you know what, it was just a slip of the tongue, or you know what, people are just blowing it out of proportion. No, Johnson's not an idiot. He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows exactly what he's saying. And the way I look at it is that Johnson has stated that he wanted to stay in the NFC North because, as he stated, he wanted that smoke. He wanted that competitive, fire or whatever between all those teams. I guarantee you it's more than just that. I guarantee you it's because he wants to go back and play against the Lions and beat them. And for me, I don't think it's just because he wants to say that he did it. I think he wants to do it to just put a huge spank down on the Lions. I think that there's something more there that's a little bit more heinous. Because again, what do we know about the NFL? Other than the fact that it's a performance business or the fact that it's a showbiz, there's one thing about the NFL that is very much like a business. It's cutthroat. The way I look at it is the NFL, regardless of who or where you came from, if they see or detect any sense of weakness, if they feel like you're drowning, they are going to find water and then they're going to pour it on top of you just to make it that much worse. And for me, I'm not as worried about this from Glenn because Glenn has shown no such kind of thing from, the perspective that what Johnson has done. Glenn has not made any sort of comments. Glenn has not thrown any sort of jabs. In fact, if anything, Glenn has remained very much true to the same roots about what he was with the Lions as he is now with the Jets, especially now with what's been going on with the whole Aaron Rodgers drama, again, blowing over. Which I'll admit, I thought that was absolutely awesome with the fact that freaking the Jets made Rodgers pay on his own dime to fly to New York, wanted to see if he still wanted to play, and then Aaron Rodgers said, oh, well, you know what? We're going to cut you anyway. I thought that was awesome. I was like, yes, sweet, classful justice has finally arrived here. So with Glenn, I'm not as worried about it. But with Johnson, I see him kind of like a wolf in sheep's clothing, and he has made it very abundant this year that he harbors something against the Lions. Like he is really trying his damn level best to really stick it to them some way or another. And I'm trying to figure out in my own reasoning what that very well may or may not be. But to me, tying this all back to the draft, when you've got somebody which I feel is vindictive, when I feel that they're trying to do something to actively harm the Lions, either by stupid jabs in the media or what I think they're trying to do now is, play the Lions at their own game, or when you have another disciple who's going to try and do what he used to do here in Detroit, and even though he might not be intentionally going that route, and again, this is just all my opinion and all my thinking, that's going to make things much more difficult for Holmes because it's like, listen, I'm now not just competing with myself and the rest of the league. I've now got two other people that are going to try and do the exact same thing. And one of them might be doing it to intentionally harm me. The other might be doing it just to get their team better. But they're both going to have the same interest of following the same patterns that we've been doing. So when I look at this draft, this is going to really test Brad Holmes' mettle because he's now got people that are actually going to be very familiar with his drafting process that are now going to try and use that against him. One that I think that is not for harming the team, and one that I think is directly in harming the team. And it obviously makes sense because, well, the Bears are an NFC North rival. They're going to try and harm us no matter what way they can. But when you have Johnson there now, it only heightens that. Glenn at least is in the AFC and he's got his own things to worry about. But I'm just telling you, I look at this draft and I'm just like, man, I have a very funny suspicion that we're going to get a stab in the back somewhere, and I wouldn't at all be surprised if it's going to come from Johnson. I would not at all be surprised if Johnson's going to play that card and then it's going to be like, okay, now we once again see the true colors of Ben Johnson. Because again, I remind y'all, who was the one that said, oh, you know what? He'd been taking, interviews, had already been setting up different people to become his new coaching staff before the game with the Washington Commanders had even started. And no sooner had that game gotten over, he was already off to Chicago and getting ready to become their new head coach. Trust me, I don't forget that nonsense. And trust me, when I take a look at all the other stuff that's been going on this offseason, I feel that dude has got a very devious plan in wait for us. I really, really do. But anyway, I'm going to get off this topic. I've thought about it for a while. I figured I would talk about it here, seeing as how the draft is almost here. So having said that, I'm going to end this episode and say thank you all for watching another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. If you like what you saw, by all means, highly encourage all to watch the next episode. Also encourage all doing these three things: like, comment, and subscribe. If by chance you subscribed in the past and forgot to do so at the time, I want to highly encourage all, please make sure you hit that bell notification icon so that way you guys never miss any more content I push out. Also encourage y'all to share this content. And with that, I hope everybody got something out of this content. Maybe it gave you something new to think about. Maybe it was just entertaining for you. I don't know. But hopefully I was able to give you guys something good that you guys enjoyed watching, whether it was the first time you watched me or you guys have been watching me forever and a day. Also hope everybody has something in their life that makes them happy, makes them smile. God bless, my friends. And until the next time we meet, I'll see you all in the next episode.